thank you so much for being here on Spark TV. Spark TV, of course, is a show where we interview amazing female founders and share their journey with our community. So I am so honored to have you on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I would love to start with your story. So obviously you're the founder of Milkdrop pumps, but I assume there was a little bit of life before then, if you can remember that far. So how did you actually get here? What's your backstory? Did you have a career? Have you had other businesses? What's the deal?
Yeah, sure. So I started out studying, I was a fairly nerdy kid. I was quite good at maths, and I studied engineering and commerce at university. And so I had quite a quite an enjoyable career actually from that. I think, I did started out in finance, but didn't really love that, and ended up back in engineering quite quickly. And I did about 10 years of that until I had my daughter. And that 10 years was super interesting and taught me lots of things. I think in engineering, it's one of those it's quite a misunderstood profession. I think that people often think that it's very introverted and you only work on your own and you're like sitting at spreadsheets all day. But actually depending on the type of engineering you go into, you're often working in big teams and you're working on projects together, kind of like how a marketing campaign might be run, but they're multi-year. So, instead of building a campaign, you're building a building or you're building a product or, and there's all these pieces that have to go in. And so I really loved that because I quite like the creative side of things. And so, yeah, I did that for 10 years. And then I had my daughter who is now 3, and I struggled to breastfeed her, and I ended up on a breast pump. And I think that practice of being an engineer and being in design, I just looked at this machine and I was like, how is it that this exists? I'm grateful that it exists, and I'm grateful to the designers who made it, because, we can feed our babies breast milk if that's what we want to do. But it just seemed crazy to me that we were jamming our soft bodies into like funnels that were hard plastic. And, when I talked with my friends about it and surveyed other women, it sounded like there was an extremely high rate of injury and pain, and most people just hated it. It was something like 7 out of 10 women say pumping is uncomfortable, and 8 out of 10 say it makes them feel like a cow. And so to me, that's
this is like not the time of your life where you want to feel like this either.
No, like you've just like, first of all, you've managed to get pregnant, stay pregnant, have a baby, and try to breastfeed or whatever you want to feed. And like it at this point, you need care and love and support, and these things can provide that. But it just seemed to me to be an open invitation to someone who likes to solve problems, which is like, okay, how might we make this experience one that leaves women feeling strong and powerful and like they're doing a really good thing for their baby, which they are. So that's kind of where it all started for me.
Wow, that is incredible. So I'm super interested in product, like physical products, because I know from a little bit of personal experience that they can be a giant nightmare. And come with a bunch of challenges, like firstly, the design, getting it right, getting feedback, and then suppliers and all that kind of stuff. So what was your process like actually bringing this to market?
Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, how did we make this happen?
Like, if I had have known, I never would have done it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it turns out in retrospect, the design was the easy part, right? I mean, which is, I think, partly arrogance from a designer, right? The hardest part is actually getting the word out there that this thing exists. But if we go back to day one,
we'll get there, don't worry.
Yeah, sure. Really, I just took a really methodical, quiet approach, right? So I was using this pump. I didn't like it. I had seen soft materials being used elsewhere that were like robots, like mimicking hands that could pick things up. And I just thought, well, why wouldn't a breast pump be made out of jelly-like material that could move and kind of like a jellyfish, almost like suction your breast in a gentle way, but not a creepy way.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah.
That's so why couldn't we do that? And so I ordered a robotics kit and some silicon, and I ran into some limitations, my own personal limitations, very quickly on how to use that stuff. And so I called a friend in, Danielle, who's a roboticist.
Cool.
I'm married to a GP, and so I had the sort of medical side of what's happening in the breast, the physiology. And Danielle introduced me to now, a really good friend of mine who's also one of our business partners, Ravi, whose whole job, he works at Swinburne University, and his whole job is to help students make the stuff they want to make. So he's like a prototyping guy. Like, it might be he makes, machines things on a, metal things, or it might be that he's making robots or woodwork or whatever. So the four of us got together and started trying to redesign the pump from the nipple up. Yeah. And the way we did that was not dissimilar to how people might make digital products. We just thought, okay, what's the simplest thing we can do first that we can test? And so we would 3D print molds, we'd pour silicon, we'd bring out this shape of silicon pad, I would stretch it over my pump, and I would pump with that every session. I was pumping like 6 times a day. So we could just and print, pour, test, and then go back to the beginning and do that over and over again. Yeah. And we did that probably about 20 times until we found something that worked. Yep. And then from there, it turns into like a manufacturing process, which is quite brutal and long. So I think that design period probably was like 6 months worth of work, and then manufacturing a medical device, much more regulation, which is a good thing. That took about 18 months to get it to market, and then we've been out providing these cushions to women in Australia, just in Australia, for the last year.
Wow.
So the process, it's quite a long process.
Totally. And did you know that going in, that it was going to take, especially the 18 months part?
No idea. I mean, like zero. And I think I just thought, the hard part will be the design, getting something that actually works, and then, we'll just make it and people will want it. And actually, if you look at it, the design is the reverse, right? Like, the amount of effort we've had to put into marketing to just even get your head above the parapet for people to take notice, because it's so busy and noisy now. That has actually been more, I would say, more energy, more people power, more effort than the design in the initial sort of step. So I think, like, people doing product things, I guess they always talk about this like minimum viable product thing. Like, is there a way you can test whether people need or want this before you go down that path? Because once you've started that path, especially with medical devices, there's less room for changing things. You've got to be sure that it's something that is desired. I think they use like 3 things, like desirable, feasible, and viable. So like, do people want it? Can it be made? And can it be made cheaply enough so that you can keep making them and people will buy them at that price? And so those are the sort of 3 things that we just kept coming back to. Anyway.
And so how many did you have to, so what's kind of the risk profile? Like, once you got to the end of 2 years and you finally have this approved product, did you have to order a minimum number to get it manufactured? And then what's this like, oh crap, now I got to go sell this many?
Yeah. So silicon comes in buckets of 400 kilos.
Great.
So
my God.
And you can't like use a bit and then put the lid back on it. It's not like milk or something else. So you have to use it all at once. So you have to make 5,000 or 6,000 of our cushions.
Yes.
And the other thing is that you can't, we're making this stuff out of hobby silicon in our garage. I can't test that even on a friend. Like, I had loads of friends like, I'll try it. And you're like, but what if, what if, even if I get her to dump the milk so she's not feeding it to the baby, what if that silicon reacts to her skin and I cause, it's a delicate time. I don't want to have anything to do with doing the wrong thing with other women. So we wanted to make it in a medical grade facility and then test it. So we actually made the call to manufacture 5,000 units, having only tested the product on me. And the gamble
Wow.
was, does
Yeah.
my breast and nipple represent all the other women in Australia who are pumping, or am I an
Wow.
outlier? And yet there's no way of knowing that. Like,
Yeah.
there is no data collected about women's nipples.
Yeah.
Most of the data that is collected is about creating the perfect, like what is a perfect nipple? We have,
Good question.
I would
Yeah.
argue, but there's a lot of research on how to create the perfect, most attractive nipple for surgery.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of research on shapes of nipples for algorithms to pick them up so that they don't get posted on social media, but there is hardly anything on actual women's nipple size, let alone a lactating nipple. And so when you're trying to make design decisions about, okay, well, we've got this silicone pad that stretches over breast pump heads to make it more comfortable, how wide do we make the hole to put the nipple in?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
we just had anyone we knew, we just asked them to measure for us.
Yep.
We did the best we could. And so that first set of products worked really, really well for about 75% of women,
Yep.
which in medical device land is insane. It's great.
Yep.
But in commercial land, that means, you know, we wanted to provide full and friendly returns for anyone who tried it and it didn't work, because our whole goal is to help women, not to stress them out.
Yeah.
So it meant that the cushions that didn't fit that group of women, we were frantically working, not frantically, but quickly working in the background to make ones that would suit them. But in that sort of few months while they were coming online, we, you know, it's not sustainable, right? So it's quite a risk at the start.
Did
and I
you
guess
use that, so that early data, so that early 25% of people that had to return theirs?
Yeah.
So was that the collection point for you, where you said, okay, can you give us some info about your boobs
yeah, it
so
actually,
that we can improve our product?
So the 25% was from a pilot study that we did. We didn't actually have that many people, you know,
Like buy and return.
yeah, like I
Yeah,
think
cool.
that it may be a conservative number. You know, we was probably sitting at about 10%, but anytime anyone said to us, oh, I don't think it's working right for me, or I'm not getting the right letdown, I don't think it fits or anything like that, we would just spend as long as we could with them to try to make sure there wasn't something else going on.
Yes.
Then you know, then basically apologize profusely, ask them why they thought it wasn't working, and then from that, those sort of open-ended questions, and people, you know, we would come up with a new design, and then as soon as we had the new product, we would email them again and say, hey, we've got this new one, would you like to try that?
Yeah.
And if they were still pumping at that point, like, everyone says yes, right? It's free, like, why not? And quite a lot of them found that actually worked. So we're like, okay, we've figured out why that group, why it wasn't working for them. And we just keep doing that. Like, the human population is so varied, you're never going to be able to make, like, you don't have a one size bra fits all usually, right? And
totally. I haven't even found one that fits yet. So yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason why one cushion would fit everybody. So what we're trying to get to like 99% of people covered. And we're currently sitting with, we've since had a third design, which it was coming out in October, which has different sizes. And so we've tested those with people.
Yeah.
And the feedback from those is amazing. Like, oh, this is like chalk and cheese. It's working really beautifully. So that's, you know, we finally feel like 3 years later, we've got to the point where, as a design perfectionist, we've got the product that's working. And we're also working on other products, like we're working on a pump and other things, but for this particular one, it felt like the life cycle of it is really 3 years, like, by the time
well, that was my next question to you. So interesting, having a product for a consumer that may only purchase once ever, or maybe a couple of times, like, how do you find that? Like, how do you find actually connecting with that person, finding them, and then kind of at the right time? Like, that's got to be a huge challenge.
Well, it's really hard. Like, I mean, and it's not just women who've had a baby in the last year. It's like 3 weeks, had the baby on the pump, sore nipples, need to prevent injury at that point. So we've really, it's just 3 weeks postpartum, and maybe a couple of weeks going in. The thing about birth and having babies is that as you go into it, you're really nervous about the labor, and often you're like, oh, breastfeeding, that'll be fine. So you don't sort of shop around for the same thing, especially if you're first time. You don't, you might have people say, oh, it can be really hard. And you're like, yeah, that'll be fine. Like, I'll
figure that out when I get there.
Yeah, like this giant thing that's about to happen to me. And I'm nervous about how that's going to go. And so you're kind of all trained on that. So, and there's also a lot of noise coming at you at that time as well. And you kind of just want to chill out and get away from it all. So yeah, it's quite a hard point. On the flip side of that is, though, this is a problem that's really viscerally felt, and we can, like, I know now that we can help. So one of the first things I did was a survey of other people who'd had to pump, and what shocked me about it was, I had initially asked, like, did you have pain or discomfort? And those numbers came back like I expected. Like, 2 out of 3 had pain, and 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 had discomfort, and everyone else thought they felt like a cow, that kind of stuff. But what really blew me away was how women described the experience. And, they were saying things like, I felt like a failure. I felt isolated. I felt defeated. I felt guilty for not collecting enough milk and feeding my baby perfectly. I felt alone. Like, just these dreadful feelings attached to a product which is like just a piece of plastic. Like, it really shouldn't be that awful. And so I think what I've learned is that, we actually can help in that stage. And yeah, as you say, the key is to being able to get, to be there when she's looking for us.
Yeah.
And
how, because it's interesting. I mean, we've got listeners who are serving a similar audience. Have you found any luck any great strategies of actually connecting with mums or women in general?
Yeah, I did. It's weird. It feels so random. Like, I did one TikTok a couple of months ago that was,
God, TikTok. I knew you'd say TikTok.
I'm sorry. I'm nearly 40. I have to jump on this, and I feel like a very old person, and I'm not. Like, I'm tech savvy, all the rest, but I just look at this, I'm like, how you're communicating? How? Like, anyway, I did this one video almost out of frustration, and it was just me holding a pump, and I think I had a fake boob in it, because we have a fake boob. We call her Artemis. She helps with all of our testing. And I had her in the pump and showing her nipple go into a breast pump. And I just had that. And then I showed what it was like with a cushion on. And I was just like a bit frustrated one day, and I was like, see how the nipple goes in, but the areola is supported, so you can collect milk. That's all I said. And it just went on loop. And that got to, like, it's 900,000 plays. Like, how did that happen?
Oh my God.
So I don't, and the thing that's so frustrating as like
especially as an engineer,
I know, it just drives me nuts, because I can't control that experiment, right? Like, I can't go back and repeat it, because I don't know how it happened. And then and another video I did of, like, what they used to do for women who were breastfeeding in the 1840s, if your milk didn't come in, is they would put, like, leeches on your breast to try to so it was like pretty foul. And so I put a video up about that, and like that just got an insane amount of engagement, which I get, like, it kind of makes sense. It's pretty gross. And we also still do that in some medical situations. The other thing they made you do was they would get the nurse to suck on your breast as well. So then there were a whole lot of nurses who was like, you can't pay me enough for that. Like,
totally.
so like,
there's laws against that now.
So I think, like, that stuff really connected. The other thing that I'm learning is, like, this is a really sensitive time, and we were always sort of like, there's a lot of jokes you can make about boobs, right? There's a lot of puns. I think, like, we originally had joked about calling our pump the like Turbo Teat 9000 or something like that, you know, just like something
Awesome.
totally tasteless.
Yeah.
And so you have these jokes and then you're like, okay, no, we can't seriously do that. Like these are women who've just had a baby. They're probably in tears. Like we get orders at 4 a.m. express. Like, you know, that girl is not having a good time.
Yeah.
And so that joke is not funny to her. But then once she's through that period, 9 months later, she can see that the whole pumping thing is so like, it's just so absurd. Like, what are we doing? We've got this. Someone sent me a video of their breast in a pump and they played like, I think it was like the baby elephant, like so like, I think that like the absurdity of it is, it's quite funny, but then you've got to balance that with like not
the
being
emotion someone's
sincere.
going through right at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I had pretty much written off all that absurd stuff. But actually that's the stuff that gets, you know, the most attention. And so it's a real challenge to sort of, you know, be there genuinely, but also even get people to know that it exists. So yeah, those are the things that have worked so far. And the rest of it's just like good old fashioned, you know, building relationships with lactation consultants and asking them their opinion and their feedback, and you know, because they are the ones that are seeing this play out for women. And so what they don't even realize they know when they look at this stuff, they're like, oh yeah, I could see how that would work, maybe you could think about this. You're like, okay, yeah, I'll go do that, you know. So I think like that sort of relationship building is really good. And yeah, no quick wins, sorry.
Well, no, I think that that's the point though, right? Like I agree with you. It's kind of, you know, as much as you want to be analytical, and you absolutely should be testing and measuring and all of those things, like you just got to try everything. Yeah. Especially in the early days.
I know. And I mean, you know, designs like that as well. I think like I think we got to prototype number 16 or something and it just wasn't working. You know, it'd either be more comfortable but I couldn't get any milk out, or it'd like slip off the flange or whatever. And it was 4 a.m. and I just like threw this blob of silicone at the wall. I was like, oh, this is, you know, no good. And it landed next to, for some reason there was a Stanley knife there. I don't know why.
Just and the mental state. Yeah.
No, it was there because I think we were like fiddling with the molds and trying to cut things out. Anyway, the Stanley knife was there and the blob fell next to it, and I saw the two of them together and I was like, huh. And I just picked it back up and started like hacking away at the bulk of the cushion, and I tried that and that worked. So
wow.
But I think that my view as an outsider in the world of marketing is that it's quite similar in that to that design process where you're just like trying and trying and trying, and sometimes it'll be total luck, but you have to put it out there for it to be lucky. You can't just like think about it the whole time. So yeah, anyway.
No, I love that. So tell me about the experience for you going from being an engineer to being a business owner. Has that been interesting, mindset shift, challenging?
Yeah, I think it's pretty challenging. I think like engineering teaches you to like life, probably. It's probably a bit arrogant to say engineering teaches you that, but to
well, my partner's an engineer and he'd say the same thing. So
we're sort of a bit, sometimes a bit full of it. But so I think like not your partner, just your partner's not.
No, you're right.
So I think it teaches you to be able to look at big problems and break them down into bits and methodically work through them and actually execute and deliver stuff. Like, you know, engineering is responsible for most, you don't realize it, but for most of the things we do, like you go on a trip overseas, you fly in a plane, who made that plane? You eat food, how was that food manufactured? You wear a t-shirt, like what machine made that t-shirt? Like these lenses in here, like, you know, I can see now because somebody figured out how to magnify certain parts of the way my eye look. You know, like there's so many things.
God.
So many things that people have thought through. So the world, you know, that things are made, you make things, you learn how to make things. So I think a business is probably no different, but where I've had to challenge myself is to move a bit quicker. So not every project is a multi-day project or a multi-year project. you can just put stuff out there.
Yeah.
And I think naturally for me, that's a really, if you did that in science, you'd be crucified. Like,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and I think, and the less you say in science, the more people trust you, but
Mm.
more other scientists trust you. But other people just look at you like you're not answering the question, which I'm doing
Mm.
right now. So I think the thing that I've learned is to just get the stuff out there and
Yeah.
and move a little faster. So I've had to do that, and I've gotten better at it, but it still makes me anxious. And so I do try to do both at once, and sort of plan for the long term and methodically, quietly achieve that goal, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I've had to like sprinkle in all these bits along the way, because otherwise you just don't have the market feedback. You don't build the community. If you're just standing there at the back of the room all the time, nobody knows you're there, right? So
Yeah. And I guess that's it. Like, I mean, interesting parallel between, science and business, and the long term versus short term. But it's interesting because I think that short term is the inputs. So it's kind of like, without putting stuff that's crap out into the world, you don't get the feedback to make it perfect. Because I feel like we all go into a product or a service or a business with the idea of what perfect looks like. And then day one teaches us that we are idiots and we know nothing.
Exactly. And it's all like it, in a lot of science things, there's a physical property like gravity that, like, right, like it equals 9.81 meters per second square. It's never going to change, or hopefully, and so you can rely on that. Whereas in business, it's like, will people like this month? Like, is this what they need? Are we answering the actual question? Like, it's exactly what you say. Like, if you don't put it out there, you'll never get that feedback. And I think, like, for me, sort of moving into this world, the way that I've become comfortable to that is just in my mind framing everything as a little experiment, and that helps me put stuff out faster and be comfortable with it, because I'm just like, okay, that's the experiment. And in this case, like, I know this sounds really weird, but like, in this case, the product that we're putting out there is imperfect. And so that's part of the constraint and part of the problem. And the result will tell me this or that, and then I can move to the next experiment. And that's how I've been able to trick myself into doing it.
But I feel like, as well, setting that the imperfect expectation would not be a bad thing to help, I think, shield ourselves from the bad things we say to ourselves sometimes when things don't work out as well as we thought they might.
Exactly. And I think it makes you a better you're improving yourself, right? Like, it's just
totally.
So I've found it to be quite a delightful thing, and I don't know what it would be like going back to engineering traditionally again. I feel like I might be like,
you'd be too rogue now. You'd just be
too loose. I think in a good way. So I think you only realize how much you've learned and grown, when you look back at all of that. But it's been a real privilege to learn from people who, like, are the masters of this new craft, and it's quite an impressive craft. Like marketing and it's really broad and deep, and there's a lot of skill in it, and some really clever people. So it's been delightful.
Oh, that's amazing. And what a good attitude too. Like, the fact of the matter is, being a business owner, you do have to wear so many hats initially. And I think that can be really overwhelming and confronting. But if you do have that opinion that, you can look to other people and get experts in and learn and grow. And it can be really cool.
I think, sorry, I interrupted.
Well, I was just going to say, I compare it to when I had a full-time job back in the day, and I go, for as much as I get stressed out, overwhelmed, things are hard, I'm like, I have learned things that I never would have thought that I would ever be interested in or be possible by running a business, which is so cool.
It is. It's a pretty fulfilling and lucky thing to be able to do. I think, there are some pretty big stresses and responsibilities. Like, this is a product that's going out to women who are at a moment in their life. The milk that touches it goes to feed their baby. Like there's some serious, and so there's sort of some things that I just can't budge on, and I won't ever do quickly. So that's medical regulations. Putting the woman first every single time. Our genuine desire, like we really just want to help. We're not just saying, oh, here's a market we can address, what can we make to address that? And that's fine if that's your thing, but that's not where we started. So that's really important. Making sure that we're advocating for women-centered design. Like there are all of these things that I just wouldn't have had the opportunity to do in a different role, but they're also things that I'm not gonna budge on, and that kind of makes me feel like, okay, like some things can go quickly and it doesn't matter if they go wrong, and other things are sort of non-negotiable, I guess.
And also so good having those underlying values, so you know why you're showing up every day.
It helps. It does help.
Absolutely.
Don't have the cynicism that you sometimes, especially when you're young, you go into your first job and you're like, the world's gonna be fair and amazing. And
how quickly have you learned?
Why are we doing this?
What am I doing with my life? And so how have you, speaking of women and being a woman, how have you personally managed being a mum and that and running a business, because they're both pretty tricky?
They are. It's 2 children. I think look, I have a partner who is as I would say he does probably a little more of the child and home stuff than I do. He also has his own career. So I think without that, there's no way this would happen. So he's kind of prioritized it. Sometimes he prioritizes that, making time for me to do that more than I might. So I think having that support is the only way. I don't know how. I've seen other people do that where they don't have the support around them. But I just don't know how they did that. I find it really hard. I find that like in a good week, you're kind of coasting. You're like, oh, this is great. I had, my daughter's in childcare 4 days a week, 3 days a week we have together. And you're like, yeah, this is great. We're going on adventures all the time. It's fantastic. She's growing up into a fantastic human. And then you go to work for the 4 days and you kick some goals and it's all great. And then the next week, like you're, crying because you quite work out how you plan. I think it's just a bit more volatile that I'm used to, but I've gotten better at that. Partly it's a bit sad, but I don't ride the highs as much. So when things go well, I don't like get quite as excited because I don't want the lows to be quite so low. So I've had to work on like, if your emotions are like this, I've had to kind of compress them down like that. So that's been the way that I've coped with it. Is that healthy? Who knows?
Time will tell. We'll have to do a where are they now episode.
Where is she now? But I think it's important to talk about that honestly, because I think like that question does come up a lot, and there's like a script that you can say, and there's the other one which is it's not that easy.
Oh look, and I think so I'm not a mum, and I can only speak to being a business owner, and the roller coaster in that alone is full on and too much for some people. And I can just looking at friends and family who've had kids, I go, wow, I couldn't do it. Because I just go, but I know. And it's like that, you say that you don't know how people do it and blah, blah, and you'd find
humans are pretty resilient. But I mean, I think the other thing that I try to remember is that we're not up against like the world here. We're up against the world plus algorithms, right? I know this sounds like sort of conspiracy.
Plus robots.
Bear with me. So what I'm saying is like, I wasn't really on social media much before this business, but I need to be to get the word out.
Yes.
And I might only be posting about business things, but you put that post up and then you find yourself checking your phone 5 minutes later to see if somebody liked it or if it got shared or all that stuff. And whether you look at that or not, it's still going to happen or not. You can't control it, but because our brains, like, these things are designed to be addictive. And so even if you're trying to separate yourself out from this thing, you're still judging your own value by how quickly this thing gets success or not. And I think that's So when I'm having a tough time with it, that's sort of, I go back to that and I'm like, no, you're trying to build a business that is relying on these products, Facebook or Pinterest, whatever it is, that have been built by thousands of people who are designing them in a certain way, and you're just in that system. So don't be too hard on yourself about things going well or not, because it's not actually in your control. So I think that's really helped me. It might be a little nerdy for
no, and I
to
love
help everyone, but yeah, it makes
well,
me
no, I
better.
totally agree. And I think the thing there as well for me is, don't think that one tiny action is going to change your life.
Yes.
It's the stack. It's like the post,
Yeah.
but it's not just the one post, it's the 1,000 posts over however many years. It's the this over this over, like it's all those little things. So I do the same thing when I find myself going back. I'm like, have I gotten any more followers since I posted that reel? And I go, stop it. Because it won't be that one reel that changes the game.
Exactly. And I think it sometimes helps. My grandfather was a businessman, and he I think, okay, what would he do, like 1960 whatever, how would he have built this particular business? What would he have done? And I think that helps, because you know, there was no internet. Like, they had to do everything by writing letters to each other. Like, you know, like what
your perception of how long it takes to do anything is far different.
Yeah, exactly. And like, what's the basics here? Like, you know, human behavior sort of has changed, but human needs haven't. So, you know, what is the 1960s version of this particular issue I'm having? That seems to help as well.
Yeah, amazing. So last question for you. Any advice for a budding new entrepreneur? So somebody who has maybe just taken the leap into starting their own business. Any advice that you might have given yourself back in the day when things might have been a little bit tough when you're starting out?
Still tough now, but yeah, sure.
That never ends.
I think the advice I would give is just start by starting. You know, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. So what is the piece of information you need now to get you to that next step? How do you go and find that information? Just keep it real small, because you will need to do that about 1,000 times as you build your business. And 3 years in, the questions are just slightly different. 10 years in, they're slightly different. 20 years in. So I think that that habit of like, okay, what do I need to know to get to the next stage? Right, it's this. How am I going to go test that? What do I need to build to make that happen? Just focus on that. And I think the nice thing about that is, if you are thinking about starting a business, you don't have to quit your own to do that. You can do that a few times, get your feedback, and get to the point where you feel like it's actually not that risky to leave my business now, my other work now, because I'm confident I've got the evidence to jump in. So I think that's probably what I'd tell myself, or someone who wants to be analytical about it. But I think it's a long haul. I think I read somewhere it's like 7 years average, you know, to start and end a business, and that's probably short. So just keep your eyes on the prize, and start by starting.
Oh, I love it so much. You are absolutely incredible, Alex. Thank you so much for sharing your story with the Spark community. It's been an honor to chat to you.
Oh, you too. Thank you.